All right. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
So we're entering day 10 of the Iran war, and it doesn't look good. What's your assessment so far? How bad is it?
Well, yeah, all around it's very destructive for the people in the region, but for the world as well. Um, yeah, oil prices spiked all the way up to close to 120. Uh, it fell back from that, apparently on a rumor that the G7 was going to release something like 400 million barrels of oil from their reserves, the reserves of the G7 countries. But that would only be about 4 days, worth uh, of global oil consumption. So, maybe we got an extra 4 days if, in fact, that rumor proves to be true. So that doesn't really mean much. I really don't think it's looking bad. And there's talk. It's not just that Trump is threatening to send the Navy in, and the Navy's telling him, no, we're not going to do this, or hey, we don't know exactly what's going behind the scenes, but it seems that the Navy is pushing back on that idea because it would be suicidal. But Macron is now sending the French Navy apparently to ensure that that passage through the Strait of Hormuz, is kept open. So I think it's just starting to dawn on much of the world that, this is a very alarming situation.
Well, why would Macron send his navy in there? They know it'll get shot, right? Is he trying to get drawn into the war?
Maybe he doesn't understand that, just like Trump. It's hard to believe that he does. It's probably more of a symbolic gesture. One thing he's constantly trying to, I think, inflate his own importance and the importance of France in the world. And to say, our ships are there doing something. They probably won't be doing much of anything, but he wants to be part of what he imagines to be a great enterprise. I doubt that, what could they do to open the Strait of Hormuz? They can't do anything. If they actually send their ships in there, as we've said, they're just sitting ducks, basically. They're just very close to all kinds of, not just missiles and drones, but apparently even artillery. He would put himself within artillery range. It's just almost too simple for the Iranians to start hitting ships in that very narrow strait. So I don't think he could do anything. I think it's just one of these gestures. It's just he's playing at being a great power. That's my guess.
Well, it makes me nervous if there's any other warships, from Europe, Western warships that move into that area, because I imagine what we see the Americans and Israelis doing, they just want to bring anybody possible in this fight. They didn't have this really planned out. They didn't get the regime change, but you see them trying to, let's activate the Kurds. Let's see if we can get the Azerbaijanis. What about the Baluchis? Anybody, let's, false flags potentially on all these Arab Gulf monarchies here. Can we get Saudi Arabia and Qatar, all these countries to join in the fight? So far, nobody's taken the bait. You send in these French warships. I'd be afraid that, they would false flag it.
Yeah, well, there's a chance, or the other possibility is that one of those ships just gets a little bit too close to the Iranian coast and actually gets hit by a missile, and then it becomes, a matter of honor, for the French to somehow to respond. It just makes the situation more dangerous. There's just a lot of things have already gone off the rails, and they could go even farther off the rails. Other actors could be pulled in. One thing, again, you look at the Kurds, Azerbaijan. The Kurds, what I've heard is that they seem to have finally learned their lesson. At least, these are the reports that are coming out. It's just like, no, we've got to remember what's happened in the past. We don't want to be used for this. I think at the present time, at least they're holding off. They're not, they're resisting the pressure they're getting from Israel and the U.S. Now, Israel and the U.S. have had a long-term relationship with this. So it's hard to believe that they didn't have some plan in place ahead of time with the Kurds. But the Kurds, at least so far, if the reports we're getting are resisting. Now, that may change if somewhere down the road. It looks like Iran is really weakening. The regime's starting to fall apart. They might then move, but at the present time, I think there's just no chance of it. Now, Azerbaijan has made some. I think it must have been a false flag attack. The drone attack on Azerbaijan. It doesn't make any sense for the Iranians to do that. Um, but in any case, whatever it was, they responded with a great deal, with very hostile rhetoric. Aliyev did, and sent troops to the borders, began to position assets at the borders. It looks like maybe an attack is imminent. But at the same time, I think my understanding is that they are very vulnerable to counterattacks. That the government, the economy as a whole, and the government in particular, government revenues are highly dependent on oil. And their oil, if the Iranians take out one oil refinery, that would just be a devastating blow to Azerbaijan. And the Russians are there too. They wouldn't be happy if they did this. I doubt that the Russians would respond militarily, but they have all kinds of economic leverage over Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan, Aliyev, he may have some kind of ambitions, to expand, his territory. I think he probably does. He would like to take a chunk of Iran if he could. There are those Azeris on the other side of the border there. He's done that with Armenia. I think he probably does want to do in the case of Iran. But he doesn't seem to be getting the support from Turkey. Turkey is an ally, but at least publicly, Turkey seems to be urging restraint on his part. And he would have to deal with the wrath of Iran, that it could do him real damage. And the Russians, too, could do him a great deal of economic damage.
Yeah, it seems like the play for people like Netanyahu and Trump working with these groups is to promise them some greater thing, like the Kurds, we'll give you your country eventually. Azerbaijan, you can expand your empire. You feed into that ego. And it's the same thing with Erdogan, always his dreams of wanting to recreate the Ottoman Empire. And so that's the danger, I think, with these leaders. If somehow the West is able to convince them, look, this big fight is here, it's coming, and you got to be on our side, because afterwards, then your Ottoman Empire will be created. Azerbaijan will go down in history as the one that created this new Azerbaijani country, larger empire, and the Kurds will finally get their country as well out in Iraq or something like this. That's what scares me.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's likely. I don't think.
Right. Yeah, well, I'm sure. Right. I think they all have those ambitions. And I would like to add that it's not just, Azerbaijan and Turkey and, a so-called Kurdistan. It's also Trump and Netanyahu. Netanyahu, I think, is clear. He wants to go down in history as, this great Jewish hero that greatly expanded the borders of Israel and defeated all, the enemies of Israel. I think there's no doubt about it. He too is driven by this kind of this ambition to become a world historical figure. And Trump, that's my understanding is that's, and I believe it entirely. You just listen to Trump. He was persuaded, I think probably quite easily by Netanyahu and others to launch this war, with promises of glory. You will go down in history as this great, president. You will have achieved things that nobody else could achieve before. That's the way Trump thinks. That's what he imagines, all kinds of gold-plated statues going up to him, for the great things that he's achieved. And after, again, this is what the New York Times reported after and what we suspected, the abduction of Maduro, he started to get a sense that, I am this great historical figure. I can do these things that nobody could do before. Now I'm going to do it in Iran.
Right. Yeah, the danger is as this conflict expands and things just begin to fracture around the world, then it allows that ego to pop up in all of these leaders and think like, okay, things are falling apart. This is my chance to cement myself in history for my country, to become a historical figure. And that's the danger, I think, that we got to watch out for. If this starts to pick up, then all of a sudden everybody's like, okay, well, it's a free for all now. Let's see, we got to everybody's going to go out and try to get their own. It's going to
Right.
be,
Yeah. Borders
let's hope that
don't.
doesn't happen.
This is the great redrawing of the map, and we all got to take part in
Exactly.
it. Yeah. So one thing again for Iran, it's just like the main thing above all. They just okay. I think two main things is that they have to maintain the pressure on Israel and on the world as a whole, through their economic blockade, and Israel through, not an overwhelming, but just a steady barrage or of missiles. Maybe we wouldn't call it a barrage, but just, by firing missiles, a certain number of missiles into Israel every day, they keep the Israelis on edge, and eventually going to wear them down. And it's going to, they're, I was just reading a report is that even though I think maybe only 13, 14 Israelis have died, according to the Israeli government, and in good part because they do have a very, very good, air raid shelter system network set up. But it really is exhausting. You spend, every day, your day is interrupted, or even the middle of the night or whatever, the siren goes off and you're supposed to go down into the air raid shelter. And it's, you can do that for a while. And after a while, it starts to wear down. But, but the real pain, I think, is going to be the economic pain. And the Israelis will feel it too. They may, they recently, they're dependent on oil like everybody else, and they're even more vulnerable because the Israelis, or not the Israelis, but rather the Iranians, have begun to target their oil refinery in Haifa, in part in response to their attack on the oil refinery outside of Tehran. That was so devastating. And they can, maybe it'll take the Iranians a while, but they can take it out. And then going back to Azerbaijan, this is another thing, is that, again, they're highly dependent on oil from Azerbaijan. So again, if Azerbaijan goes in, there is a chance that the Iranians could take out that oil, and sever that pipeline. That is a real lifeline for Israel. So, again, there's all this kind of pain that Israel and the world as a whole can suffer that as a result of Iranian actions. We see them happening now, and I think they can sustain this pressure over time. Now, let's see, what was I going to say? On the other hand, the second thing that Iran can continue to exert this pressure, inflict this pain, and maybe eventually get cause enough people on the other side, the Europeans, to start really pressuring Trump. Trump starting to feel domestic pressure at home, maybe even Netanyahu feeling some pressure in Israel, and say, okay, we got to maybe put an end to this. But they have to. The Iranians also just have to keep their country together. They have to remain united. If there are signs of a real sort of unrest or unraveling, then again, what we were just talking about, these ambitions of these various leaders, I think will be difficult to restrain. They really will see their chance. They say, okay, Iran has really been weakened. This is my one chance to go and get this piece of territory. And then, that would be very bad news for Iran. But if they can hold together, continue to, inflict this pain, maybe they can, eventually. I think this is a best case scenario for Iran, and that's what they're working for. And it's, it's a reasonable hope they can eventually get Israel and the U.S. to just call it quits, to say this isn't worth it. And of course, they'll proclaim victory and move on. But
I mean, all signs show that Iran is not at risk of fracturing at all. If anything, it's just becoming more and more unified. I mean, especially the actions that the U.S. did. I think striking that girls' school, and then Trump just going out and saying, no, it wasn't us, it was Iran. Iran's missiles are so inaccurate. I don't, part of me wonders if he even believes it. I just feel like maybe they're just lying to him constantly, and he just doesn't know, because, I mean, we can see the videos of them taking out, THAAD interceptor radars and systems, these are highly accurate, and they're taking out our air defenses. But he just says, yeah, no, that was Iran's. And then we see the video of that Tomahawk missile. It's clearly the United States. Not only did we bomb it, we double tapped it. So this is, I mean, I think just killing 168 little girls just on day one I can't think of a worse possible thing to do. I feel like in this war between Ukraine and Russia, there haven't been that many little girls killed in 4 years,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I don't know those
Well, I mean,
exact civilian casualties,
I
but
mean, there's a huge disparity in civilian casualties, and I was looking in the Ukraine-Russia war. I think total both sides over the course of 4 years, it's about 15,000 civilians. 15,000 civilians, and in this war, we're approaching 1,500 in Iran. Already, at the end of the first week, we're pretty close to that. So, at this rate, in 3 months, we're going to surpass the Ukrainian total for 4 years. And just give you a sense, it looks, again, I think you look at that and say, wow, Iran's getting the Gaza treatment. This is, we've talked about that one school. Apparently 65 schools have been hit, that not all of them have been destroyed. There hasn't been such a great loss of life in the others, but 65 schools have been hit. And it's hard to believe that that's an accident. I'm sure in some cases it is, but it's hard to believe that 65, that some of those weren't intentional targets. I think we see, the Israelis at work, again, just applying the horrible logic of Gaza to Iran.
Yeah, but the difference is that Iran can give Israel the Gaza treatment. And this is what we're seeing. The tactic of the U.S. and Israel, the U.S. has always been the shock and awe. We just go straight up the escalation ladder. I mean, we saw what we did. I mean, we went ahead. We've already struck, a desalination plant, which is a war crime, depriving these 30 villages without any fresh water now. That's a crisis there. They hit that oil refinery right side of Tehran. Now there's black rain was falling on Tehran, and now this huge oil cloud is just moving over Central Asia and the rest of Asia. It's horrific. They struck like the Goldston Palace, UNESCO World Heritage Site. So the U.S. and Israel, they set the precedent. They did this first. And in response, we talked about the Haifa oil refinery. That's in response to Israel and the U.S. striking, the civilian infrastructure, this type of stuff. They said, okay, you set this precedent, not us. Now it's fair game. And they're able, who has escalation dominance here? I think it's Iran. They just took out, the Orit Rabban, Israel's largest power station. That supplies Israel, that compromises 20% of Israel's total power. It's out. Yeah. Tel Aviv was blacked out. I don't know if there's lights on again.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know the details of that, but I know there was a blackout for hours.
Yeah,
and they were, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, Israel's a small country. It's like you want to hit Iran's energy infrastructure. Right. Okay, good luck knocking it out. We saw how long it took Russia to take it out in Ukraine.
Yeah.
But here, one strike, Iran took out 20% of Israel's power. So to me, this is like, okay, you guys chose this game, but you don't have escalation dominance here. You think that you do. This is just the problem with the United States. It was the same thing in Ukraine. Even Obama recognized this. He said, like, oh, well, we can't have this war here because Russia has escalation dominance.
Right.
He realized that.
Right.
Biden and Trump apparently don't.
Right.
But they just have this, they live in this fantasy world where U.S., we're America. We have dominance in every field, anywhere around the world. End of story. I don't want to hear anything else.
Right.
And I think that's just the idea. But we don't. At least I don't think we have escalation dominance here, unless we talk about nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's true. I think it has to be pointed out that you can make an argument for striking like oil refineries and so forth because they also support the military. Now, I think that strike it was more than the refineries. We saw the horrible environmental consequences of the strike that the Israelis made, but but that in itself, just striking an oil refinery is not a war crime. Now, I think desalination is something different. This is drinking water for civilians. It's just, this is a basic necessity, to maintain life. And yeah, that desalination plant was hit there. Now, in Iran, again, it's part of it is desert, but but much of it isn't, and it actually has abundant water resources. So only 1% of their water supply is from desalination. Now, Israel is very different. My understanding is the majority of, well over 50% of Israel's drinking water is actually supplied through desalination. And now you've given the Iranians a justification for responding in kind. They can go for your desalination plant. You went after theirs. They could make that
Yeah,
argument, which it
it's
seems
the
rather
same.
foolish, right?
Right. It was the same thing in Ukraine, right? I mean, Ukraine was hitting small little peppering little oil
Right.
refineries or substations or whatever, not really doing any damage and really impacting much of
Yeah.
Russia's energy. And Russia said, if you keep doing this, then we're going after yours. And then we saw what they did.
Hmm.
And they're able to go after it. It's the same
Right.
thing. It's like, all right, good. You took out 1% of
Yeah.
Iran's ability to fresh water supply with the desalination plant. Well, now Israel, you're gonna lose 50% of yours. Like, why would you engage in this trade?
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's probably true. One thing I may add is I think I mentioned, well, before the war started, I summarized some points that Ted Postel, the missile expert from MIT, had made, and he said that he believed, the long range, anyway, Iranian missiles, the ones that they had fired in the 12-day war last year, were not particularly accurate. They had, they're accurate within a kilometer using a
Yeah,
standard measurement. But the thing is, he says, um, he's looking at it now and he sees, according to his calculations, the accuracy of the missiles that they're firing now it has significantly improved. And it may be, again, this is something that the Iranians have been saying. They say, we're just using up our old missiles first. I wasn't sure if that was true, but this is an indication that it is true. And they actually have their more accurate missiles, are now coming into operation. And I think maybe their best haven't even been put into play yet. I'm not sure. But, increased accuracy is bad news for Israel. I mean, again, that means, okay, your oil refinery, your desalination plant, they can go up this escalation ladder in a way that's actually very, very painful for Israel. And then there's the nuclear facility that they haven't, where everybody knows they're storing nuclear weapons. They haven't gone after that, but they could at some point.
yeah. I think in the 12-day war, we saw the accuracy of those missiles. So I know Ted Postel said that. I know he's an MIT rocket scientist, so we need to defer to him on a lot of things. But I just know maybe the input he got was wrong because we saw missiles coming down the 12-day war that hit precise targets within downtown Tel Aviv. I don't think Iran would take the risk if they didn't have that accuracy to just lob a missile and risk some massive civilian incident, or hit some residential tower and causes, make them look like the bad guys. So
Yeah.
I think we were aware of the precision. I believe. I mean, we saw what they did.
Yeah, it seemed to me, but again, minus very much a layman's point of view and just based on, videos that I saw, whatever. So anyway, but I'm just saying that he himself is saying, that it looks like there's a significant improvement in accuracy. And it's clear, without a doubt, we're getting absolute proof of this, that for example, their medium range missiles, the ones they've used against the bases, are highly accurate. Yeah,
within
we
a
can.
meter.
Yeah, I mean, they have pretty much destroyed some of these bases. I mean, they're just trashed. These are, multi-billion-dollar bases, and they're gone. This is nobody's. Pete Hegseth's getting up there and crowing about this and that. Boy, we've got a huge bloody nose there. We're talking about real military infrastructure that was built up over the course of many decades, and it's just gone. Some of those bases may not even be rebuilt.
Right. And Iran taking out those radars, I think, has been devastating.
Yeah.
So now there's huge holes in our ability to detect and intercept these radars. And then that's why you see, in the beginning, whenever there's an incoming missile, you fire 2 or 3. Now we're firing 7, 8, 9, 10 and still missing. And that's because we don't have all these, our layered radar network system, our defense system, layered defense system has massive gaps in it. So they have to fire so many more interceptors to even hope for a hit. And we're seeing them fire up to 10, 12 interceptors and still miss. So the calculus is just completely in the favor of Iran now in this war.
Right.
So we're in real trouble. There's no out. This is the big problem. Like we started this and we decided to go straight up the escalation ladder. We decided at desalination plants and we bombed a girls' school. And now we're going to have to reap the consequences. And I just don't know. I know people in the Pentagon, we've been talking about this forever. This is playing out exactly kind of like we said. And we're not military geniuses,
right.
But so many people saw this coming. We knew exactly what happened. And now they're in this and they have no plan B. Their hope was just to win this within a couple of days. And somehow, we quickly went from we got to free the people to Iran to straight up genocidal talk, unconditional surrender. The Iranians need to fear for their lives. We're just going to, Lindsey Graham said, just you wait, we're going to bomb the hell out of these people. That's what he says. We're just going to bomb the hell out of these people. Yeah. Not even trying to pretend that we're going for the military.
Right. And we're going to make a ton of money off of it.
And we're going to be so rich after this is all done. We'll kill all these people and then he's a psychopath.
Yeah, right.
Completely unhinged. Right. But we don't have a plan, but they still have this talk, you saying unconditional surrender. What are we saying here? Yeah. That we're going to go World War II scorched earth on these people. Right. We're going to we can't even do that. We can't send ground forces in there. Yeah. We're trying to convince all these other people to do it for us. They're not going to do it, or highly unlikely.
We've dropped a lot of bombs or fired a lot of missiles into Iran already, many thousands, and they have done a great deal of damage. Again, it just has to be emphasized. Iran is a very large country, as we pointed out. We've talked about how large a country Ukraine is. It's by far the largest country, fully in Europe. But as we pointed out, Iran is, if you look at just Kiev-controlled Ukraine, it's like 4 times the size, 3 times the population. This is a huge country. Now, think about another country, again, considerably smaller than Iran. That's Vietnam. We dropped, I believe it was 7.5 million tons of bombs on Vietnam, which was twice as much as was dropped on in all of World War II by the Allies. And we lost that war. So, and that was years and years and years. And a lot of Vietnamese died, something like 2 million. A lot of them died. But in the end, we were unable to achieve our objectives. And there was a lot of lying in the military. We learned about this later. This looks really good according to this metric or that metric. We're doing very well, and we're defeating the Viet Cong, and and they're about to collapse. And eventually, that's what the Pentagon Papers was about. It was revealed that they actually knew that it wasn't going well, and support for the war in the U.S. collapsed. Now, I hope it doesn't take years. I don't think it can, because this is such a, there was no Strait of Hormuz off the coast of Vietnam, but there is one here. So it's just like the Iranians have just put their fingers on this jugular vein, and they just cut the flow. And it's just, the global economy and Europe, above all, is going to feel the pain very, very quickly.
Yeah, I would say our allies in East Asia as well, South Korea and Japan, are highly dependent on the oil coming from the Strait of Hormuz, and they are furious right now. And I wonder...
But they have at least prepared for it. But still, the Japanese have something like 8 months. But... as some of the other countries have, maybe close to that, but at some point it's going to be all gone. The Europeans just haven't prepared, and they're going to be hit so hard, and sooner. They're going to be hit first, is my understanding.
Right. And so, if the U.S. plan is to give Iran the Gaza treatment, that's impossible to succeed. We see, look at Gaza. They've been bombing it for over 2 years, and Israel's able to just fly whatever it wants over. It can fly whatever it can't. Basically, it can. There's no air defense in there. They can leave from an airport that's just 10 minutes away and just fly really low and just drop bombs all day long, and nothing can happen to them. And they've been doing that for over 2 years. And we see Gaza we've completely destroyed it. The people are still there, and they're still fighting. They're still trying to make their homes out of rubble. Well, partly they don't have a choice because they're captive. This is what's also just so insane, is that this is a captive population that they've been bombing, in a small area that's only that is only what, like 13 by like 3 miles now.
Right, it's tiny.
It used to be 26 by like 4, and now it's just nothing. So you're just talking about a tiny little area, and they still cannot crack the spirit of these people. They're still there. They're still surviving. They're still resisting. So the idea that you can do the same to Iran, this massive country that isn't held captive, it's impossible.
Right.
It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, right,
think
exactly.
about it.
At Gaza, 2 years, over 2 years now, because I think right now I just want to mention, because we forget about Gaza. They continue to kill people. I think now 640 have been killed since the so-called ceasefire went in effect. And they have again, I heard this just a few days ago, and I haven't heard anything about a resumption of supplies. They again cut off, supplies of food. They put a starvation blockade on Gaza again. Nobody's paying attention to it right now. And then everything else, all the other supplies. Again, there's just, if anything's coming in at all, it's just in dribbles. So the horror in Gaza continues. It's just that the horror is now expanded to Iran. But let's not forget what's happening there. But yeah, again, it's important to remember that Gaza is so tiny. I mean, it's got just, less than 1/45 of the population of Iran, essentially 2% of the population of Iran. And I think much less of it. It's got to be less than 1% of the territory, much less than 1%.
Way less.
Yeah,
wait,
yeah,
like 0.1%.
Yeah, right. It could be. You may actually be right. And then you see, after 2 years, in the end, they still really didn't achieve their objectives. So what are they thinking in the case of Iran? Now, it's not impossible. I think let me put it this way. I don't really want to say this because it seems like it would be such a horrible outcome. It's possible the Israelis may achieve their objective. I think the Israelis have a clearer idea of what they're doing than the Americans. The Americans, clearly the Trump administration doesn't have a clue. It's just something they're always contradicting. In Iran. What?
In Iran?
Yeah.
Okay.
Clearly the Trump administration doesn't have a clue what they're doing. They keep on coming up with, new explanations. You hear several different objectives listed every day, and sometimes it's just absurd. There's obviously, they just don't know what they're doing. I think the Israelis, again, like we said before, they want a Syria, they want a Libya, they want to just cause so much destruction in this country, that it can't really ever recover. And to fracture it, of course, to balkanize it. They want to weaken to the point where, maybe they really can get the Kurds to go in there, the Baluchis and the Azeris. At this point, it's not working. And I'm hopeful that it won't work, that they're just not going to be able to succeed in this case. But there is a chance. This would be the nightmare scenario for me, that they do succeed. I think it's not likely. I'm not saying this is going to happen. I think it's unlikely, but that's the real Israeli goal here. All the stuff that Trump talks about, I don't think the Israelis really give a damn about it. They know what they're doing. They're not interested in actually getting a friendly regime. I think they understand that that's impossible. All this, this idea that Trump's going to improve the next leader or something like that. They want another Syria, but just on a much larger scale. And that's what they're going for. Or sort of like another Lebanon. It's just like they could weaken it so much, and then constantly, when it looks like they're starting to rebuild, just go again and bomb and go again. So that's what they're after. That would be that would be victory for them. And a long war is fine for Netanyahu because, we know about his political problems and he enjoys being a wartime president. At least, right now it's working. Everybody's behind him, including the leftists. It's with very, very, very few exceptions. But, as I was saying earlier, just talking about the air raid shelters, you get this initial reaction where everybody rallies around the flag, but over time, and especially in an obvious war of choice like this, I think it's different for the Iranians because they know it's about, it's existential. They were not the ones to launch this, and they need to stick together. There will be some real questioning, even within Israel. If this goes on, they start to feel real economic pain, and this just disruptions to daily life continue, and then parts of Tel Aviv start looking like some parts of Gaza or something. I think, maybe this is what the hope that even Netanyahu, even within Israel, there's going to be a reversal of course.
Yeah, I'm kind of wonder what the sentiment is right now within Israel. I imagine that people are getting uh, quite antsy, a little bit of unrest building up, being in these shelters constantly. And I've been seeing, I'm sure you have too, a lot of this footage coming out of Tel Aviv and other cities throughout Israel. It's getting hit hard. Like this is, they have to feel like, oh, maybe we're in real trouble here. And if they start having problems with electricity and fresh water, this is going to get bad real quick. Like you said, you want to give Iran the Gaza treatment. Well, Iran can give Israel the Gaza treatment too. And if that starts to happen, then all of a sudden it's like Israel can start to become like, Gaza in the sense that they're trapped. I don't know their ability to move out. I mean, you're currently engaged in this war in Lebanon. Where are you going to go? You're going to go to Jordan, where the majority population is Palestinian. Everybody hates your guts. Can you get out through Egypt? I don't think so. They're going to, if they are at real risk of being completely trapped. I mean, you're going to have to try. There'll be some evacuations, I'm sure, by boat if they're able to. But I don't know if Netanyahu is even allowing people to leave. I don't know what the situation is right now in
Well,
Israel.
yeah,
I don't
he
know.
is. I think, there's some sort of effort to put up a brave. I think, he's even saying that, okay, flights will be resumed from Ben Gurion, which sounds crazy because it was actually struck just the other day,
Yeah.
Ben Gurion itself. So I don't think that's actually happening. But, I think both the IDF and the American military are trying very hard to give, like it happens in war, give a positive spin to everything. They're reporting amazing successes. Again, I read in Haaretz, it just sounds like, it's just nothing but total victory so far for the U.S. and America. And they don't talk about, like these THAAD systems that have been taken out and these advanced radars and these bases that have been trashed and whatever, and that's these, this is not something that's up for debate. This has happened, but it's kept out of the media and within, military censorship in Israel is very strict. And it does affect your perceptions. It's clear that Iran is continuing to strike Tel Aviv and other targets. You don't see the damage, or only in rare occasions, because they are cracking down really hard and trying to prevent it from being shown. So we don't really know the extent of it. But I'm sure it's significant. And we're just a few days into the war, a little over a week into the war. It's going to, if this goes on for weeks and weeks, that's just going to keep on accumulating.
Right. I think maybe one thing that we can hope for that could end this war is that the Israelis' tolerance for pain is just too low.
Right.
They once they get hit enough, they're just gonna be like they will rise up against their own government. They'll be like, we can't take this. This is what we want. We like doing this to other people. We don't like it happening
Right.
to us. We can't handle it.
Right. That may be true. I mean, we saw that actually during the, really the first part of the Gaza war, so called. It really wasn't a war, but the Hezbollah came in on this to support the Gazans and started firing rockets, pretty primitive rockets overall, and drones to some extent into northern Israel. So much of northern Israel was evacuated. I think 100,000 or something. I can't remember the exact number. There were different numbers that were floated at the time, but those people left and they had to stay in hotels the whole time. And then you started getting reports to someone saying, I'm just not going back. This is just, which is so different from the Gazans or the majority of Iranians and a lot of other people who have a real love for their land, a real attachment to the soil. Say, what happened in northern Gaza was not northern Gaza, but rather northern Israel, was just nothing. It was just nothing, again, but it was enough for them all to flee. And then even to think that I don't want to experience this discomfort of staying in a hotel for a year again. Yeah, by the way, I think there's well over 1,000 Israelis in hotels now because their buildings have been destroyed, and actually, I was reading before the war started that there were hundreds of Israelis that still had not been moved back into their homes after the 12-day war of last year. So anyway.
Yeah, I think that the Israelis are more trapped than we realize. I don't think they can just get out so easily. Because, Mike Huckabee, within it might have been just like 2 or 3 days after the war started, he was saying for all the, because there's a lot of U.S. citizens, obviously, in Israel, and a lot of them are trying to get out and they can't. And his message was basically, the most important thing, shelter in place, don't worry. If you really have to, contact, there are a few routes. If you take a bus out in the Sinai and then find some Bedouins that are willing to take you on camelback across this route here. It's not easy, and then maybe you're lucky you can get to Amman and there might be a few flights or something. It seems like it's not, they are trapped and they will become increasingly trapped. And then I think that just the psychology of that for the Israelis, that will crack them. I hope it will.
Yeah, well, the danger though is, of course, is what we've talked about earlier, the Samson option. It's just when they start to feel that they maybe really are trapped, then we'll start hearing murmurings of the use of nuclear weapons.
Don't you think that would cause also just a huge rift and destruction within their own society? They'd be like, oh boy, we're talking about using nuclear weapons. Some of them are like, yeah, we have to do it, but some of them realize, well, this will mean the end of us too, right?
I don't know. I don't get that sense, unfortunately. Again, I'm looking at the so-called dissident media really within Israel, and they're fully behind the war, and they're always behind these wars. And it's just that, there are some dissonance about the dissent is really about domestic politics and about, the Supreme Court and, the question of, the position of the ultra-Orthodox within society and that kind of thing. But when it comes to these wars, there's really very, very little dissent. And, maybe a nuclear weapon would be a bridge too far. But if they're feeling truly trapped and scared, I think that Israeli society would be behind it. That's my guess.
It is just like this apocalyptic death cult that we have going on. That's what makes this just so terrifying. And it's not just the Israelis, it's who's in power in the U.S. as well, the Trump administration. I saw this video. I'm going to show it to you. Okay. It's with Pete Hegseth, and this is from 2018, just to get an idea of just where these people are at, where they're coming from, trying to understand the decisions they're making. And I think a lot of it is this kind of messianic type of vision, this apocalyptic death cult. And I also am worried that I talked about this before when Trump survived that assassination attempt. I was like, this could maybe give him a God complex, that God saved you to do something great, something bigger. And this is the messaging that people like, I'm sure Netanyahu and Lindsey Graham around him are probably doing this. There's a reason that you survived this. You are ordained to do great things, to save Western civilization and to destroy our enemies. Like, this is what I'm really afraid of. And Pete Hegseth embodies this completely as well. So let me show you this real quick.
And today, Jennifer and I and others had a chance to go see the Western Wall of the Temple Mount, the Western Wall tunnels, so much of the old city. And as you stand there, you can't help but behold the miracle before you. And it got me thinking about another miracle that I hope all of you don't see too far away. Because 1917 was a miracle, 1948 was a miracle, 1967 was a miracle, 2017, the declaration of Jerusalem as the capital was a miracle, and there's no reason why the miracle of the reestablishment of the temple on the Temple Mount is not possible. I don't know how it would happen. You don't know how it would happen, but I know that it could happen. That's all I know. And a step in that process a step in every process is the recognition that facts and activities on the ground truly matter. And that's why going and visiting Judea and Samaria, understanding that sovereignty, the very sovereignty of Israeli soil and Israeli cities, locations, is a critical next step to showing the world that this is the land for Jews and the land of Israel. And I believe, as was mentioned, he said you need to, what was mentioned is you need to buy the ticket. Don't just wish for 40 years to win the lottery, buy the ticket. I would submit to you, in light of the support you have in Washington, D.C., the support you have amongst patriotic Americans, amongst evangelical Christians, amongst believers, amongst Republicans, even amongst some Democrats who can barely say it anymore in Washington, buy the ticket, take your action, do what needs to be done here in Israel, because I truly believe this is a moment where America will have your back. You have Donald Trump in the White House. You have Mike Pence as vice president. You have Nikki Haley at the UN. You have true believers in Israel and America that have your back.
And that's why Pete Hegseth became Secretary of War. That's why he was anointed, right? Because they know that he is completely, just lockstep Zionist. This is it. This crazy idea. We're going to rebuild the Temple Mount, start the apocalypse, whatever. It's insane. It's just.
Right. It's even, well, it used to be truly fringe within Israel, but now we have people like Ben Gvir, who's actually actively involved in this, in positions of real power. I mean, he's in charge of all the police forces within Israel. And they are, it seems like every month I hear about some new, let's say, breach of a previous agreement. There had been an agreement to respect the Muslim control of the temple there, the Al-Aqsa. And that is just being eroded away and then literally eroded from the ground. There are tunnels that have been dug. They've been discovered and stopped. But at some point, it's, as the country drifts farther and farther, in this, towards this extremist position, it's going to, there's a real chance that it's going to happen. Now, and that may be, that could really be the end of Israel more than anything, even this war in Iran, because this is something where the Sunnis are just not going to be able to tolerate it. Unfortunately, we see a split among the Sunnis. There are these corrupt Sunni monarchies that have really made their peace with Israel and are making money off of the relationship with it, and have, sold the Palestinians down the river, you could say. But then there are these Sunni extremists, the jihadis that have. That actually are more focused on killing the Shia, and destroying Iran and Hezbollah and so on, who are the main supporters of the Palestinians. And so it's, this is all fine with the Israelis. Now, I think the majority of actual Sunnis are not happy with any of this. They do want to support the Palestinians. They're not happy with their corrupt monarchies, and they certainly don't agree with the activities of the extremists, of the jihadists. But still, they're powerless, right? And this has all worked very well to the benefit of Israel and the United States and the region. But if they actually do destroy, the Al-Aqsa, and they build the third temple, or begin that project, I think that there's just no way that the monarchies contain their own people. The rage would just be just an unconquerable force. It would sweep across the Middle East, and it could be the end of Israel. Now, I mean, again, it's just like the Israelis just have the sense, I think you could see it from Pete Hegseth's speech, he too has the sense that, all these things are just inevitable, it's just one miracle after miracle victory. So we just, why hesitate? We can just do all these things. People, stop listening to the naysayers. That's partly why we're in this crazy war in Iran. And that's maybe, and that's probably why we're going to end up, with the third temple.
Do you think that they will do it before this is all said and done?
I don't know about it before the end of the war. It may, but I think at some point. I think that's the way they're going. That's the way Israeli society is going.
But But this war will end when Iran says it's over, and
Yeah.
Iran won't stop until that I mean, when will they stop? Israel would have to like pull out and go back to the 1967 borders. I mean, like how?
Yeah,
And we just know that they. I know it sounds impossible, but what else? What else can they do? I mean, Iran's going to keep hitting them. They're in real trouble. So, they can't make Iran stop. I'm sure I think they would love to get a ceasefire now. There's rumors that they're like, okay, maybe that they're trying to still float a ceasefire with the U.S. and Iran's just like, no, we're not doing that again. This is going the distance. So Iran, it will say when it's over. And when will Iran say it's over? When Israel and the United States have been militarily defeated. And this is what makes it so terrifying, because a military defeat potentially means a nuclear weapon. Right. They'll still be militarily defeated. I think they'll be it just will be just a horrific thing. And who knows what Pandora's box a nuclear weapon would open up.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know. It's just hard to see a happy ending to this. Yeah, what can I say? We've talked about
Well, that for me, I've been just trying to look at some ways for this to end. There's two ways I think that we could do it. One is that we're able to say that Trump is unfit for office, was that the 25th Amendment, and he gets pulled out, and we put the brakes on this thing, or he gets impeached. I just don't know if this is how feasible that is, or like we're saying that within Israeli society itself, that the tolerance for pain is just not high enough, and as they start to suffer more and more, they start to be like, well, we don't want this war. We're going to lose everything now. They realize in what dire situation they're in, and they'll say Netanyahu's got to go. I think that's what we got to hope for. It has to be some type of change within our countries. We keep on talking about what can Iran do? What can Iran do? We got to think about what we can do here in the United States. This is our government. Mm-hmm. What can we do to get this to stop? And so we just got to keep on talking about it. We got to make sure that people are just express their discontent, call your congressman, whatever it takes, march. I don't know. It just has to stop. Right. We got to get this guy out before we're in some horrible, horrible situation. And I think it's moving that way. I saw something on X just this morning. It was from one of the Hasbro accounts, Stop Anti-Semitism or something like that, posting with a picture of Tucker Carlson and saying that this is all basically saying Tucker's fault, that now 45% of young Republicans view Jews as a threat. I don't like how they how Stop Anti-Semitism is. They always say everything Jews. I think we know what it is. It's Zionism as a threat, basically. But we're talking about, and I'm sure, I don't know when this poll was taken, we're probably over 50% now amongst young Republicans. We're talking about Republicans that view not that like they don't like Israel or like Zionism. No, they view it as a threat. That's what they see. Like that's where we're at now. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. It's over.
Yeah.
I mean, for the Zionists, it's just how does it end? I don't know.
It's just, but they can do a lot of damage before they finally lose. Up to and including nuclear strikes. That's the horror of this, right?
Well, what did you use? What the world do if that happens? Because this is a real
I think there would be real consequences. I'm sure that some of the Europeans are going to stand by, just like the American government will stand by Israel and make some mealy-mouthed statements. But it's really basically Iran's fault, or, it's too bad that the Israeli government had to do this or something. They'll try to come, but it's not going to work. In the end, they'll say it. They'll stand by these governments that always stand by Israel will still stand by them. But a lot of countries, I'm just thinking about China or something, that is obviously opposed to what's going on here and clearly is helping out the Iranians to some significant degree. But I think they would really flex their muscles in a way, maybe start talking about, economic war where they can do terrific damage to, not just Israel, but to the U.S. Because you would just say right there, these people are a threat to the whole globe. This is, right. And this has to be brought to an end. I think there just will be no denying it at that point. And it would be a fatal mistake on the part of Israel. I think Israel is headed, into the trash can of history, as Zionism certainly is, the Zionist project is, because of what we're talking about. They have lost the younger generation in the U.S., and the U.S. is absolutely critical to the maintenance of the Zionist project. But that, even so, it takes time. You still have all these institutions in place and all these, it takes a whole generation to have to die off or something before you could really be sure. Maybe it could happen, it could be accelerated, but it could still take, years and years. Because they do have a real firm grip on power. They have a lot of levers. They have a control over much of the media. I think in the end they're going to lose, but they can fight and they can hold on for a while. But if they actually go nuclear, I think that would greatly accelerate the end of Zionism. Because even in this country, there would be such a revulsion, that it just wouldn't be contained.
Well, let's hope we never get to that stage.
Yeah.
But I'm really, but I just try to see a way out. And then, like I said, unless there's something drastic. But the thing is, like, even if we get Trump out and Israel's on its own, then they'll use a nuke. I just don't.
Right. Well, there's talk. I think about this. Is that it's been rumored that that's part of. Again, Marco Rubio came out and said, and pretty much the New York Times too, is like, it was basically the Israelis that pushed Trump into this. They didn't have to push very hard. So I'm not trying to absolve Trump of any kind of guilt in this. He was complicit. But part of what convinced him and maybe some of the other people in the Pentagon and the administration was the fear that they just let the Israelis go ahead on their own. Clearly the Israelis would not be able to defeat Iran, and in fact would receive a really severe beating from Iran. And sooner rather than later. We're talking about long term, but it would be, they wouldn't be able to maintain a military effort, a successful military effort for more than a few days against Iran on their own. And then they would start talking about nuclear. And so it's like the thinking, at least,
nuclear
this is
blackmail.
according to certain rumors anyway, is that's really what convinced some in the U.S. administration the Trump administration to go in there. He said, if we don't, then we got a nuclear blackmail really on our hands. Well, you can say this is an example of nuclear blackmail,
Yeah, anybody that says that Israel's an ally is just, I can't have a conversation with that person. This is just so insane.
Right.
Okay, well, Dad, I know you wanted to touch a little bit on Russia and Ukraine, so we're coming up on an hour. Do you want to still hit that, or do you want to save it for tomorrow?
Well, we could. There's just a few comments that I want to make. It seems like on the front, nothing has really changed. The Russians are moving forward, not at a particularly rapid rate, but they continue to advance, and they sent in another barrage of missiles and drones. I think it was just the other night, and did a great deal of damage, as they've been doing. So that trajectory remains more or less the same. There's talk about some great offensive. I always hear this. So one of these days it may really be true, and they decide to greatly accelerate the process. So it may be that this talk is about something that really is going to happen. But at this point, I'm going to just wait and see. Now, I think some of the more interesting developments are, let's say between Ukraine and Hungary. Yeah. Actually, there are a couple of events that are very, very interesting. First of all, is that Zelensky actually threatened to assassinate Viktor Orban. I mean, it wasn't. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like, okay, yeah, if you interpret this words in this way, it was pretty much an outright threat to assassinate. He said, we could give our address. He said, he's talking about what a pain Viktor Orban is, because why? Why is Orban is holding up the 93 billion, euro loan to Ukraine, when Ukraine says we got to have that soon, like in a month, or we just collapse. And he's holding it up. Why? Because the Druzhba pipeline, or what remains of it, I think it's the networks. Part of it was closed down earlier by the Kiev regime. But the remaining, the one pipeline that was still functioning and was supplying oil to both Hungary and Slovakia, oil that's very, very important to their economies, was shut down. And the Ukrainians claimed that, it was hit by a Russian drone. And the Slovaks and the Hungarians are saying, well, let's go see. And even the EU has offered to send in like an investigative team, and the Ukrainians have refused it. I think it's clear that the Ukrainians did it themselves, because this has been their crazy policy, is just to, they don't like the fact that these countries are still receiving Russian oil. So they just took matters into their own hands and shut it down. But this time, both the Hungarians and the Slovaks have responded very forcefully, because they do supply, I know, especially in the case of Slovakia, electricity to Ukraine, which is obviously very important to them at this time. It's one reason that part of the grid is still functioning. And they said, Robert Fico, the leader of Slovakia, said, no more electricity, until you get that oil flowing. And Viktor Orban says, no more. And he's joined by Robert Fico on this. You're not getting that 93 billion euros, or is it 90 billion, until that oil starts flowing again. So, so Zelensky, actually threatened to assassinate. What he said is, we'll give his address to, our special forces, and they'll go and speak to him in the kind of language that they use. I mean, I think that that's an outright threat of assassination. And, the Hungarians responded forcefully, and even the European Commission came down and criticized Zelensky pretty forcefully for this. Now, they're not going to back it up with anything. And they're not doing anything to really, as far as I know, to pressure the Ukrainians into actually supplying that oil, which would be the obvious solution to this. But the Europeans, because they're in favor, they actually are in line with Zelensky on this. They don't want those countries or any country receiving Russian oil, which is just particularly crazy at this time. If you cut off oil to these countries as it's cut off right now, that just exacerbates the energy problem that all of Europe is going to have. But that's
right,
where we
what
are.
I was going to say.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's just they keep on it's like Viktor Orban and stuff. So they shoot them, it's like they shot themselves in the lung, and it looks like they're doing it again. It's another bullet in the lung. It's just like they can't. It's a suicide cult.
Yeah. Well, let's see what happens when oil breaks $200
and it
a barrel.
Again, it just amazes me, the thuggishness of this regime in Kiev. This is the celebrated regime in killing, the standing up for our values and our freedom. This is the kind of language, again, we've talked about the kind of characters they're not just, a few bad apples down at the bottom, but at the top, actual murderers, at the very pinnacle of power within Ukraine. And this is the regime that is supported by Europe. So it's kind of, it's different, but it's, it's about as ugly as the Netanyahu, regime down in Israel too, in a different way.
Yeah. Well, I think history will definitely label us as the bad guys. I think this is also why it's just so important for us in this time to speak out against these things, against what our government's doing, in Ukraine and obviously here in Iran and supporting Israel, because, okay, your country might not be on the right side of history, but you can at least take pride in knowing that you were on the right side of history, that you stood up against this and you spoke out against it. So I think that's just our duty on an individual level. That's what we can do. It's just, we got to make sure that we stay on the right side of history and we don't. And this is why I talked a little bit of, I won't get into this larger conversation, you can save it later, but in our members only video is talking about sort of the soul of a nation. And in that sense, that's what it is. In our collective soul, I feel like, is that this is a spiritual battle for us as well. That if we have the majority of America, if it sways to where we celebrate, like, FAFO, war is hell. That's what it is. That's why you don't mess with America, because we just punch you when you're down. We'll mess you up. That's when you've lost your soul, I feel like. So if the majority of America starts to adopt that policy, then I believe, we're have a crisis of spirit here. So we got to make sure that we don't lose our humanity, that we stand up and, we talk about this and we show to the world that no, we as American people we are not bad people. We do not accept this. This is unacceptable. This is evil. This is wrong. And we want it to end, and we got to do what we can to make it end.
Well,
We'll
well
end it
said.
there, I guess. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a bunch, Chad. I'll
All
talk
right.
to you soon. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.